So we've done partial introductions, but why don't we start with everyone taking a turn, introducing themselves, saying what company they're from, and kind of what their company does at a very basic level. No more than 10 seconds each, DSP, SSP, agency, trading desk, all the above. James, you want to start?
Sure. I'm James Murphy. I'm with RhythmOne. We're an end-to-end omni-channel programmatic marketplace. I run global operations for the company, including ad ops, obviously, publisher operations, and programmatic platform.
I'm Brian Stempeck, Chief Client Officer at theTradeDesk. We're a demand-side platform. We power most of the largest agencies and marketers in the world. We buy a lot of in-app inventory.
Hello, does this work? Yeah. So I'm Todd Tran. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Teads, and we are a monetization platform for premium publishers. Specifically, we're probably best known for inventing the outstream video format.
Hi, I'm Matt Schmidt.
There we go. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Matt Schmidt at SpotX, Regional Vice President of Agency Development. SpotX is a video SSP and modern ad server.
Jay Seideman with Oath. Oath is owned by a telco, so we try and be mobile first as possible. We do a lot of different stuff. I work on the demand side platform specifically.
Great. One more. Let's go around, and why doesn't everyone tell us what app they're most into right now? You can warm everyone up. You don't have to start, James. Anyone can start. What app are you guys spending a lot of time on?
For me, it's Spotify. My brother works there, so I'm trying to support the IPO, trying to get them towards profitability, but it's an awesome app.
The MLB at-bat app, baseball season. I can continue on that one. So NBA app after that.
Yeah, self-promote. Yahoo Sports is a darn good app. Actually, when I became part of Oath, I started using it again.
I'm actually with you on that one. So I'm sad to say I have joined a fantasy baseball team yet again. I keep telling myself I'm not going to do this in my life, but here I am using Yahoo Sports, and it's a great asset.
So let's get started. The title of this panel is the Trends in Mobile Programmatic 2018. So let's go around. I mean, what's the number one trend you see this year for mobile programmatic that's an enduring one that is not a fad? Anyone can start.
I think for in-app specifically, with the whole ads.txt trend, that's the next obvious channel that it's going to go to, right? So it's going to be interesting how we deploy it within that medium. Obviously, there's URLs saved within the App Store. People are going to tag onto that. So I think we have to accelerate that. And I think companies that have SDKs into applications, they're going to be successful, obviously having hooks into publishers and more control and obviously real inventory that could scale across all formats. So.
Yeah, I think Dave had an awesome slide, which is that 70% of ad dollars in digital are on mobile, which is a lot higher than you would kind of perceive it as. But I think if you ask your average marketer or agency, they think 99% of that time or the mobile spend should be on Google and Facebook. There's still, you see the stat from the investment banks all the time that 98 cents of every dollar incrementally spent in advertising is going to Google and Facebook. And now I don't think that's totally true. I think part of that's going through their exchanges and their different DSPs and SSPs and things like that. But I think there is a case to be made of showing marketers where consumer time is really spent. It's not just browsing your news feed on Facebook. There's lots of games, there's lots of other apps, but I think as an industry, we've done a pretty poor job explaining or showing a marketer, here's where people spend all their time. It's not just on Google Maps and the Facebook newsfeed and Instagram. But those are big, but we buy a ton of inventory from Spotify and Pandora and audio. There's a bunch of examples like that. I think there's some education needed to the marketer.
So I think just as an admission, at Teads, more than 95% of the publishers that we work with are mobile web or desktop web, and we have very little in-app inventory, and there's a reason why that's the case. And I also, prior to Teads, I came from an in-app background, so it's a little rusty, but I still remember a lot of it. But I think the issue is that at Teads we work with brands like Condé Nast, Business Insider, Forbes, a lot of Time Inc., a lot of the very premium publishing brands. And they typically have a lot of web inventory. And what we see is that the buy side, one, is more comfortable with these type of brands and therefore gravitate towards it. And frankly, it's just easier to buy. You buy desktop web, you buy mobile web, everything's about the same. So I think the trend that I'm starting to see, but I don't know if it's going to last for, if it's really going to tip it over. And I think this is where everyone in the room can help, is that I think that the in-app ecosystem has been on its own island for a while. And when you're on your own island, the brands don't see you, don't think about you, and find it so foreign, difficult, not easy to buy. And so they tend to not buy it. And I think that if we then take it out of its own island and move it into the mainstream where everything else is operating on, and this includes working with measurement companies that work on apps, that work on web, but should also work on app. It includes identity. It includes thinking about the type of apps that people use and trying to think about exactly who the audience is instead of too focusing on exactly what the app is, like it's a game or a utility app and it's not as premium as, say, Condé Nast Traveler, right? So we need to make strides in all of those different areas, bring it into the mainstream with everyone else, and I think then there's going to be a seismic shift in brand spend moving towards the in-app environment.
Yeah, if I can build on that, I mean, one thing we've seen from a bunch of CPG brands and finance brands is them saying in every channel they want to buy viewable inventory. And a lot of in-app, you can't even measure it. It's not in the SDK. You can't measure moat. And you might think, well, like, what's the problem? This is a highly viewable ad. Like, this is not an issue. But if the brand can't measure it, they're not going to buy it. They have guarantees with publishers and SSPs. They're only going to pay for viewable. They back, like, that is their table stakes. So if you don't have in-app measurement for viewability, you're off the table for a lot of brands. You're exactly right. It's harder to buy.
One of the trends I think will also accelerate, Todd, what you mentioned, is that more people are watching long-form, full episode player, OTT broadcast quality content across their mobile phones in mobile environments. So as broadcasters try to figure out how to capture and monetize those audiences, brands will follow.
Yeah, I think just picking up on what Todd and Brian were saying, it has been an island, but also the big trend that I would say is there's all these, you showed the Loomis slide, and not only do we need to get, you have to, Dix, yeah. Call out. We not only want to measure and do things similar in mobile and in app, but we also have to do it with the same vendors and the same publishers. And I think the challenge has been that there's this divide because it's often different measurement vendors and it's often different publishers where we find scale in mobile as opposed to what we're historically been serving on desktop and mobile web. So we've got to figure out how to get, I don't want to say consolidation, but we've got to figure out how to get the measurement companies as well as the publishers to really bridge between the two. And that's very hard to do. If you're a big web brand, to have then a big app it's not immediate. It doesn't happen turnkey. So the disparate systems, the disparate vendors on desktop versus mobile app is, I think, where some of the challenge lies.
So we've talked about, I heard some of the obstacles that we face in getting brands to advertise more in-app. But when you talk to marketers, what are some of the reasons you put out there as reasons why they should be advertising more in-app that they may not be understanding or that may be really specific to the in-app environment?
I think one point, if you look at where a lot of the volume's coming from, specifically to in-app, it's from a lot of the gaming apps. And what they're doing is driving installs for other gaming apps. And what's happening in that environment, you're seeing CPMs of 30, 40, 50, $200 CPMs. So when a brand advertiser comes in, obviously that's a ridiculous, metric to kind of hit it, pay for that type of inventory. So, it causes challenges for that reason. But I think if we educate the industry that these are the types of channels that are performing, this is the inventory that's going to drive value for a specific brand, meaning having these conversations with the agencies, I think we'll get somewhere. And I know Todd and I were chatting about this in the other room, where maybe it's a different pricing model. Like everybody's sold on solely CPM as it relates to programmatic. Like, why not do a CPV model? Why not do a different kind of metric across the board? So something to consider there.
I think that in-app actually has a huge amount of advantages actually over web. I mean, one, from an identity perspective, the device ID is more persistent and reliable than a cookie. You have very good engagement with in-app. You have good viewability on video. You have good completion, viewability, and audibility in all the formats that we've seen to date. And so I think that if the problem though is what Brian mentioned, which is that could be all true, but if it cannot be third-party measured, then it doesn't mean anything to the brand advertiser. And this is the big issue, right? Is we need to have a way of measuring this with the same vendors as on the web, and not different vendors, because advertisers don't want a different set of vendors that they have to work with for in-app versus web. And I think this also goes to when we move into the TV and connected TV space, because that's also another ecosystem that now has to be merged into everything else that we're doing, right? So, and I think that one of the issues with in-app is that a lot of the app publishers that I've spoken to in the past is they say, well, I don't have to worry about fraud or viewability. It's inherently fraudless or viewable. That might be true. First of all, it's not true, but if it might be true, but even if it is true, you need to prove it through third-party measurement.
Yeah, I'd say two of the reasons I'm bullish on an app this year. One is outside the U.S., especially for the trade desk, we have offices in Jakarta and Hong Kong and Shanghai, and a lot of the Asian markets, it's all mobile. So like we're starting with an app. It's not other dollars migrating over. We're starting with all in-app in the first place. So it's not a migration from desktop. But the other is, like back in the US, we're seeing a lot more advertisers using device graphs. So using a company like LiveRamp or using AdBrain or using TapAd or whoever to extend the data they have in their DMP and say, here's my first party data, let me extend it to a device ID, which is, as you said, more persistent. And then being able to tie that back to closed loop measurement. Because for most of our clients, there isn't necessarily an install. There's not a measurement happening inside the app itself. They're trying to tie back to, did this person go to a dealership a month later and buy a car? Did they buy this product at the grocery store on a regular basis? And they need a strong device graph to do that. And we are seeing rapid adoption of device graphs from many of our clients.
Until a lot of the vendor situations are kind of worked out with mobile app, what I usually recommend to brand advertisers is to look at a smaller group of apps, because just like how we each have an app that we use, each app has a very unique audience and it tells something about that person. So use that contextual relevance on top of a lot of the data-driven solutions for extra refinements when you're targeting app traffic. So.
I think the other thing that we need to solve for is every medium needs kind of like a core metric that they're after. And this is why TV has won for so long. It's a very simple Nielsen, you can question the hell out of it, but it's accepted. And I think app marketing really started with cost per install and CPI. Where we've seen it really change over the last 6-9 months is now it seems to be more about lifetime value, LTV, incrementality. And so I think we kind of, as an industry, need to pick a metric. I don't think it's CPI. I don't think it's cost per install. I think there is probably fraud. I think there's incentives and other things that work against us with that model. It's simple, but I don't think it's the right one. But coming up with, what's the medium going to be known for? Web has struggled with this for a while, but there's always acquisitions and click through and some sort of standard metrics. I don't think we have something like that to hang our hat on with in-app.
Any ideas on what that should be as it relates to brand marketers in-app?
I mean, I think time spent is a big one. We're seeing, Moat and Oracle are pushing their attention metrics pretty heavily. And we're seeing a lot of advertisers buy into that to move away from, they get pretty tangled up on attribution models of trying to figure out, well, all right, the consumer saw 17 ads before purchase. how do I allocate credit? When you start to actually add up the time, they make decisions on channels based on time spent. I think in-app would actually play pretty well there. I think it would surprise a lot of marketers how much time is being spent, particularly in some of the gaming apps.
So a couple things I didn't hear in response to the question about reasons why brands should really spend more dollars in-app are areas like location-based targeting, reward-based advertising, incentive-based advertising, or more creative executions, kind of innovative creative executions like AR, VR, or 360 video. Are those kind of secondary to the issue that's been raised around some of the other issues, specifically around measurement, or are those things that you can use to convince brands to participate in?
Well, I think I'm surprised none of us mentioned location. I mean, that is core. I mean, that is the thing that it does that no other medium really can. So I think that's got to work into how we create a currency for this. I just don't think we've necessarily cracked it, but certainly the data is there, and there's a lot of opportunity with location for almost every vertical, that a brand works in.
I think with emerging formats, I mean, with video everywhere, right? That's a new theme. With things like digital out of home, mobile app's going to play a big role as far as beacons and identifying the user, going back to location and device ID. So I think it's all going to tie into kind of an omni-channel play somehow, and mobile app's going to be kind of at the center with the device ID targeting and location-based stuff. So.
Yeah, location is huge. I just forgot to talk about it.
Me too.
But like Factual is a partner of ours. We do a ton of work with them, and most of our clients want to do some kind of geographic targeting. I'd say there are some concerns. Sometimes you see different apps or SSPs misrepresent the actual location or falsify because they know they get a higher CPM or higher fill rate when they do have it. And a lot of the brands and agencies are kind of onto that, but it's created skepticism about the quality in some cases of that data. When it comes to things like VR, AR, or more, I'd call kind of emerging types of inventory, programmatic is really about scale. Like our clients want to run global or national campaigns. They want to use kind of standard ad formats. The newer stuff tends to start with more direct to publisher or direct to ad network type relationships before it evolves into programmatic.
So let's take think this scenario through. You're talking to brands every day. Let's say you're talking to a fashion or beauty marketer, and these are guys that are spending a lot of budget, with brands like Condé Nast or Hearst at Elle and Vogue, and online or in print. And if they have the ability to target an individual or lots of individuals that they know read those publications, but that when they're spending time on the commute back to Brooklyn, playing Candy Crush, how do you convince them to target and spend in-app to reach those users? And how do when do you think that will happen, where you have that conversation with those sorts of brands? I'm talking about Chanel's and Gucci's and those sorts of brands, where they're excited about it.
Well, I think there's probably different levels of advertisers, but if you're going to the Chanel, Gucci, I'd say that's probably not your first place that you should be hunting for advertisers for in-app, unless your app is really premium, because those guys care probably more about context than about audience, and they will simply not advertise in 90% of context that they see. So trying to fight that would be probably, I would say, that's probably not your first port of call. But there are brands like, CPG brands like P&G and Unilever, et cetera, that are more mass market and looking for audience, right? So these guys are much more open to in-app environment, even in-game environment, so long as you can prove to them that their audience is there. And the other thing is you have to prove to them that it's brand safe, right? So if there's brand safe and it's got the audience, and it's measurable, they'll probably buy it, right? In most apps.
Okay, so you mentioned context, and we've talked a little bit about different types of marketers by industry. If you think about, say, movie studios, gaming companies on the one hand and say fashion brands on the other hand is more amenable to in-app advertising. What are some advertising industries where there's the most upside, where they're not participating right now, but you think you see some promise of that they will start participating and spending more?
I don't know if it's exactly right to start on the vertical, but what we think a lot about with in-app marketing and what users will adopt, what they have an appetite for, it's about the utility of the app. I do think that exists more on the gaming, entertainment, ride sharing, those kind of things where there's frequent use, where you're getting good value out of it. Those marketers tend to be more open to it. Again, that's not necessarily a vertical utility, but I think that's something that you want to look for, and that's probably why if you think about like a high-end fashion, there's not a ton of utility. It is about the brand. It is about, you could create an app that's engaging, but that's not really the starting point. So we see a lot of adoption right now from just anyone who has a utility-based app.
I mean, I give one example of vertical would be any location-based retailer, QSR, things like that, where they can not only target with location data, but also measure. So, historically, we've had clients who their primary KPI was the ad viewable? What was my overall CPM? Maybe a cost per click, kind of old school metrics. And right now they're migrating to more results-based metrics. So saying, what's my cost to get someone to my location, to my fast food chain, to my store, knowing that I can then tie that back to that's my result now. And that is primarily measured by an app, and most of the inventory is going to be in-app. So that's a vertical that we see taking off right now.
So we've talked a lot about brand safety and then kind of just the trust issue involved with advertisers and putting their money toward in-app. You've seen a lot. What are some examples of the most egregious forms of fraud in-app that you can talk about?
I don't know that I have any specific in-app examples, but I mean, we know it's out there. We know it's likely not the people in this room doing it. Likely, I don't know a lot of people in the room, but it's something that we need to categorize and we need to stand up and fight against, because it is holding a lot back. And I think if I'm a brand, I'd be nervous about it as well.
But I think, I'm certainly not an expert on app fraud in any way.
I don't
but
think anyone is.
But the things that I've heard about include app ID spoofing, which is like domain spoofing on web, where you're pretending to be an app that you're not. Then there's also pretending that you have a location when it's a fake location and not a real location. So things like that happen within app, and I think that a lot of that happens with resellers, which is where ads.txt has really helped for web, and I think that we have to do something like that for in-app, because if we could, have AdTech intermediary work directly with a app publisher with an SDK installed and no reseller, you're going to find a lot less issues with a lot of these things.
The other form that we kind of hear about is, to add to yours, Todd, is device ID spoofing, as well as looping ads in the background while you're not engaged with them. But just like you said, everyone needs to be working directly with those apps. Less intermediaries, the better.
I mean, we've mandated that all of our SSPs work with white ops. And so we actually scrub all the ads hitting our platform for fraud coming in for these issues. Because the moment you have an advertiser that thinks they're hitting one device ID and is actually hitting another, or thinks they're hitting one app and is actually hitting another, it throws off their confidence and they pull budget. They'll spend the budget with Facebook directly or Google. They don't care. So we have to protect the kind of sanctity of the ecosystem. But I'd say the other kind of tactical thing is that if you go to any agency trading desk, they have a site list or their whitelist of here's the approved domains that we want to run on. And it'll be sometimes 10,000 sites, 20,000 sites on it. A lot of them are actually less comfortable with appless. Like you'd think they would be by now, but you'd be surprised at how many of our clients kind of come to us saying, hey, do you guys have a recommended list of apps that we should run on? Because they're all afraid of running on the one app that the CMO gets an angry call about, saying like, why did you run my ad here? And then you ask the CMO, why were you on that app in the first place? But so they need your help with that list and proving you should be on that list.
I think basic things like obfuscation around ad serving type domains, like a MoPub domain that comes through a lot. in the in-app world, obviously the normal user stuff and so on. But I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think something like ads.text, we have to accelerate that and define authorized resellers of that inventory, and how we do that, because it's a domain-based system, we'll have to solve for it. You tie it to the domain in the App Store, and obviously we could figure that out. But even, you know, continuing down that trend, like ads.cert and advancing to, you know, OpenRTB 3.0, and I think that's where we have to get to as an industry. And, you know, talking about consolidation, I know you brought up the Lumascape. I mean, if you look at the amount of companies, there's 4,000 companies in the middle right now. That's not sustainable, right? It's like something has to happen. So it's the companies that are moving to the edges, that have solutions integrated at the publisher level. I know today's conversation is about in-app, integrated with the app via an SDK. They have more control over that app, obviously direct relationship, and they could sell it as an authorized seller. I mean, I think we need to get there as a bare minimum. And then these other things with, you know, verification and validation obviously just fall into place.
So it sounds like ads.text is a great way to, if that could be applied or some equivalent could be applied to in-app, that would help. It sounds like viewability metrics, something there, that the same as what some vendors do on web. If that could be applied to in-app, that would make a big difference. What's the time frame for solutions around this? We're not going to solve it right now on this panel, but if when you look out into the future, are these things that are in place available by the end of this year, or is this 2019?
I mean, it really comes down to that, right? I mean, you know best, obviously sitting on the DSP side. It's like when you get these mandates from major brands, it makes everybody move quicker, and you know that's kind of what we need. And obviously P&G has been very vocal in this category, as they should. I mean, if you look at the philosophy we have at RhythmOne, it's very basic, right? It's delivering a real person that's viewable across the audience that you want. If you mess the first thing up, nothing else matters, right? So we can't take any shortcuts in that category. So,
I mean, we buy in every digital media channel. So we buy connected TV and digital radio and display and native and everything. And the one category where there's a viewability challenge is an in-app. And it's not because the technology isn't there. You can install mode in the SDK and other things, but it takes more work for the app owner to do that. And so we see a smaller percentage of the apps that have actually installed that in the SDK to get it measured. So there's less that's measurable. That's on the app owner themselves. That's on the content owner. It's not on Mode. It's not on the TradeDesk or any of the DSPs or SSPs. The tech is there. That's the easiest path to unlock more spend.
So the viewability issue is in, the technology's in place right now. It's just an adoption issue. Okay. Let's switch over onto the supply side. Curious, you know, if you look at what's happened over maybe the last 18 months on the web, there's been tremendous adoption among publishers of header bidding technology, bringing in lots of different demand partners, driving up competition and therefore yield. Lots of publishers report bringing in 6 or more bidders drives up yield by about 40%. So that, and I've read that about 60% of the top publishers do this now on the web. But in app, that's not the case. Why is that? I can go.
I mean, it's a great. I mean, if you look at the largest kind of players in that space, it's Google, exchange bidding, it's Amazon. Obviously, they're going to focus on markets that are a bit bigger initially. And given that, you know, if you look at Google EV specifically, they're competing with their AdX business. So it's a slow rollout, getting a proof of concept down, understanding the margins that they're going to make, and then rolling it out into a big business. So I think that's really the only reason, just focusing on, you know, one market at a time. I mean, from what I've seen, what they did specifically, but. Yeah.
Let's open it up to the viewers here. Any questions from the audience? Think. I've got more questions. I got a lot of questions, but I bet you guys can ask better ones than me. So I'll come back to you in a few minutes. Okay, let's stick on the trends idea. We've talked about the trends for 2018 that we think are enduring ones. What about things that are happening right now that you think might be a fad? What is something that is happening in the mobile programmatic, but that's maybe not something that's going to last beyond this year.
I mean, I think a lot of the mobile web spend will move over to in-app. We still see like a surprising amount of mobile web. I think it's for some of the reasons that Todd and others elaborated on, which is that for premium publishers, that is still the primary way that consumers are going to consume their content. But over time, especially when you see, seeing Pandora embrace programmatic for digital audio along with their other channels is huge. You now have every major kind of content owner in the in-app world that's selling programmatically kind of outside the walled gardens. So I expect that mobile web will continue to dwindle, even though there is a good amount of spend still there today.
Yeah, I mean, let's dig into that. I mean, what are the, it's amazing, right? I mean, you think about the time, the amount of consumption by users in-app versus mobile web. I've read a report that said it's 6x more in-app than it is on mobile web, yet more ad dollars are spent in mobile web than in-app. And so, I mean, what are some of the biggest misperceptions among marketers as it relates to mobile web versus in-app advertising opportunities?
I think a lot of that happens just because it's easier. And that's really about it. It's a direct extension from your desktop. Same metrics move over.
Again, going back to the gaming example, I think a lot of gaming publishers, in-app publishers, they're not offering that inventory programmatically because they could sell it to other, gaming type advertisers driving installs and so on, and it backs out the very high CPMs. And it's going back to the point I made earlier. It's like, how do you, educate brand advertisers that those are good, real users that are going to perform for you, maybe on a different metric that we have to measure it on, not just the CPM, but obviously we're a long way from that. But I think that's the biggest reason. If you look at companies that focus specifically on gaming in-app, 95% of that inventory is not even touching a programmatic channel.
Yeah, I'd add to that most of the growth in programmatic has come because of audience data. It's an advertiser bringing in their first-party data or buying third-party data from an Oracle or from an Axiom or companies like that. If you look in most DMPs to go buy audience data, the center of gravity is still the cookie. It's not the device ID. And there is a lot more penetration now of clients who are using device graphs and saying, well, let me tie my first-party data on my customers to a device ID, but that is not the mainstream yet. And so in the programmatic world in particular, most of our growth has come from audience buying. And to your point, like, you can do that easily in mobile web. It's an extra step to do that with a device ID.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a key piece to getting more dollars into apps. I mean, what other pieces are missing as it relates to identity matching that need to be figured out before brands can do the same thing in-app that they can do on web? Are there other pieces?
I think that the technology is there. It's more just education. Like, a device graph is a kind of a complex thing to explain to a brand. They understand it when you explain, like, okay, it's this login across different devices or from your phone to your desktop. But explaining like a probabilistic device graph to a marketer is a fairly challenging thing. They get it, but it's just taking time. But if you're selling on behalf of an app or an SSP that represents apps, part of what you need to do is explain, here's how you can activate your first-party data on this inventory. You have to use a device graph. Here's some things we recommend. Here's how you do it in the DSP, but it is that extra step.
I think a lot of apps also need to work on passing IFA in every instance. We work with a lot of apps that do not, and we have to actually syndicate it, create a synthetic one for them so that there's something to target against.
I think there's, from a perception issue on the supply side, I did some work with Rovio a few years back, and I mean, so the brands that very easily bought Rovio or Angry Birds were kids brands, so that was the obvious one. They were buying it and it was easy. You can go to Hasbro and Toys R Us and the entertainment companies, and they would be buying Rovio. But then you go to brands that were targeting an older audience, and there was a real hesitance because they actually thought that the large majority of the audience was kids. I mean, how many of you, raise of hand, how many of you have played Angry Birds? So 99% of the room.
How many
So
still play Angry?
right. I mean, so
How many are playing it right now?
yeah. But yeah, when we looked at the data on Rovio, and we looked at the audience, I mean, it was every age group. It was not kids. It was just anybody that owned a smartphone was playing Angry Birds. And so to show that data to brands and to say that, hey, your audience is here, right? And so here's the thing. If I go to a CPG brand and I tell them, I can target your audience because they're all playing this game. And I can show you that the viewability and the completion rate, if it was a video or other metrics, are really good, right? And I can prove it to you, and you can third-party measure it. And I can show you that there's very little fraud, right? And you can target the audience, right? Because I'll pass you an identity, an ID, and then you can target that audience. If you go to P&G or a lot of these CPG brands and you showed all that, they'll say, yep, I'll buy it. Yep, I'll buy it. But right now, that's not readily available. So there's, I guess, a couple of things that has to happen. One is you have to make the brand comfortable with the inventory. Comfortable means I trust the inventory. I know that it's not fraudulent. I know that it's not spoofed. I know that it's viewable. And I know that it's touching the right audience. And then the second is what was already mentioned, which is ease of use. Like, how easy is it for me to buy and implement all the things I want to implement? Not that easy at the moment, right? The good news is it's all moving in that direction. And I think there's a big opportunity because with all of the initiatives going on in the industry to clean up the supply chain, what's happening is that there's now, in 2018, there's less supply available than in 2017 because we cleaned up all the crap and we got rid of it, right? And not all of it, but a lot of it. So there's less inventory. So what we've been doing is this year, we decided to make a big push into the in-app space because we think there's a lot of great performing, clean inventory there, right? That can fill that gap that has been wiped out by clean advertising. So 2018 is a critical year for the in-app space to show that it can actually be easy to buy and that people can feel comfortable with it.
Great. Thanks. Any audience questions? Last call. Okay, Pepe, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to get the thoughts from the panelists on the duopoly. We've alluded to some of the dependencies with Facebook and Google, potentially Amazon. What are the implications from your point of view of having such a concentrated industry? And is there room for the other LumaScape partners to survive and grow? And also, these two companies especially are not famous for being very app developer driven. They're great for the advertisers and for brands. That's been their core. So what are the implications also for the publishers?
So from our point of view, Google's ultimate job is to monetize YouTube and Google.com. That's why it's a great company. That's why it's a great property to advertise on. Facebook's ultimate job is to monetize Facebook.com. So if you were to go to either of those companies for your media mix model and say, how much should I spend on Facebook.com? Their answer would be 100%, right? And that's kind of the problem is when you start spending more and more money with them, of course, they're the best answer for all of your media spend. Martin Sorrell, the CEO of WPP, if you go to a WPP conference, will say, these are not technology companies. These are two of the best content creators in the world. They're publishers. And that's how we think about it, is our job as a DSP is to be objective. We want to find the best result for a marketer independent of where it is. If Facebook's the best answer, great. If YouTube's the best answer, fine. But more likely, there's another answer out there that's more cost effective, that has better results, that a consumer's spending more time there, it works for that brand. We forget that the internet is a really big place. It's not just Facebook and Google. People spend time in lots of places. And so I don't see them as the be-all, end-all answer to all of media and advertising.
I think other publishers are kind of getting a bit smarter and realizing that Google and Facebook are actually reusing some of their data in instances. And I think smart media owners are taking their content off of Google and Facebook. And like Brian said, the internet's a big place. There's plenty of places to monetize that content. And first-party data from those publishers is going to help drive a lot of that, those dollars and spend going to outside of Google and Facebook.
I think so the bad news was I saw a figure last year that showed that Google and Facebook increased their market share over everybody else last year. So that's the bad news. The good news is that if you ask agencies or brands, do you want to spend more on Google and Facebook? They'll say you absolutely not. I already spent too much with them. I need to find alternative source. In fact, there are groups of people in the agencies whose job it is to find alternatives to Google and Facebook, right? And they're struggling, right? Because Google and Facebook has scale and it's effective and it makes it easy to buy, right? So it's like you just have to do the work once and you get all of this. And I think that's really what we need to get to. But the good news is that I think with the brand safety issues that have hit, for example, YouTube, I mean, we've seen a lot of budgets come our way from that, right? And I think that a lot of that will happen again, this year.
Great. Well, on that note of optimism, I think we're going to call it a wrap. Please give the panelists a round of applause.